We're back with Dr. Sandile/Hlatshwayo. Sandile, do you remember the question or you want me to repeat it?
I remember the question.
Go ahead.
So you were asking me what issue, global issue, that I would attach myself to. So just to repeat the question, you were asking me if I had to attach myself to one global issue, which one I would attach myself to.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I have to choose, but if you want just one, the answer that I would give, it's pretty actually holistic, is economic growth. So the challenge of promoting economic growth. And I think that so much of it comes down to inclusivity. And so I'll take this in a couple steps. So the first is economic growth. So as a macroeconomist, economic growth is the singular thing, and I'm actually going to GDP growth, the singular thing that actually has been the most sustainable way of bringing people, whole nations, out of poverty sustainably. Now, the reason I add this second piece in terms of inclusivity and the importance of it is and this is inclusivity with respect to women and women's equality, with respect to LGBTQI, and inclusivity as well, across the board. And I mean, you could even think in India in terms of the caste system, right? So there's a lot of different ideas that inclusivity could include. But the reason I say through inclusivity is that there's ideas, there's productivity, there's money being left on the table by not including certain groups in conversations, by not including certain groups in the boardroom, by not including certain groups in market structures. And it's low-hanging fruit, if you will, particularly in the developing and emerging world context. And so if I had to pick a particular issue to attach myself to in terms of what I think actually is just a very, very easy sell economically and a very impactful sell economically, it would be promoting economic growth through inclusivity.
Wow. So when you first started your program, your PhD program, what were some of your early challenges?
Challenges with respect to, so just kind of more generally speaking? So I'd say the workload, just the sheer exhaustion of being able to manage that workload. There was absolutely a question of whether I belonged in the profession. Although, again, the stubbornness aspect, I was like, who cares if they think I should be here or not? And then there was a longer term question in terms of whether I wanted to stay in academia or return to the policy world. The policy world being different than, so academia is becoming a professor, and whereas the policy world is very much not doing teaching day to day, but instead doing the work that I just described, which is actually meeting with policymakers and affecting real policy change, which is very different than the academic space.
In the chat room, Johnson said, given that you have researched and traveled, lived in South Africa and traveled to the Caribbean, what lessons can South Africa learn from the Caribbean, and what lessons can the Caribbean learn from South Africa?
Oh.
Putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, so that's a fabulous question. I actually think that there are a lot of dual challenges that both regions are facing, and I'll kind of compare just Guyana to South Africa directly in terms of what I kind of felt and saw on the ground versus doing the whole Caribbean.
Yes.
Trinidad is very different from Barbados, is very different from Guyana, is very different from, so let me just compare kind of Guyana and South Africa. So because both economies rely so much on commodities, that can create these boom and bust cycles for the country's stability, economically speaking, at the macro level. And both countries are and need to continue taking steps away from being so dependent on commodities. So in Guyana, agriculture, sugar, bauxite, et cetera. So you need to step away from these commodities and towards manufacturing and services to become more stable over time, so that you're not wildly impacted by these global trade prices in these commodities. In South Africa, it's the same thing for diamond and gold and natural gas, for instance. In terms of lessons learned, so South Africa is still struggling with this. Mm-hmm. What has happened, though, is they're particularly focused in industries, the mining industry in particular, that's very capital intensive. And what that means is that it does not use very much labor. And so that's led to a structurally persistently high unemployment rate, especially amongst young people. And so you have this whole generation of lost talent, right? Because they have nothing to really put their efforts towards because there aren't jobs there. And so I think a lesson to Guyana, especially as it starts tooling up in the oil, and as it continues tooling up in terms of its natural resources that it's discovering in the interior, is to find some kind of balance for that. So there is this major technology boom, and you could go full technology and have two people, right, working in the interior, two people working out on the oil rigs. It's to find some kind of balance for that, where you are getting the jobs with it, and not just the tax revenues to government. So that would be a direction, I guess a lesson in that direction. Lessons learned from South Africa's experience is to have government somehow be a part of that process, if you will. And then in the other direction, in terms of what South Africa can learn from Guyana. So it's interesting. I think what I was very excited by, and I already kind of seen this on paper, is that Guyana did relatively well coming out of the global financial crisis, and they've had strong growth. They've had consistently higher growth than the rest of the region. And now there's this large conversation around what to do with the oil revenues once they do start coming through in 2020. There seems to be a turning point, and everyone in the country, especially with the new government coming in as well, everyone seems to be really excited about having that conversation and open to new ideas as well, and also willing to say what happened in the past did not trickle down to everybody in the economy, right? What happened in the past has not worked out for especially the very, very lower rung of society. And so how, going forward with this new government, with this oil money that's about to come in, how can we disrupt that dynamic? How can we make sure that more of this actually does come back to education and healthcare provision and infrastructure? And so the willingness to have those conversations, the willingness to kind of open up the field to lots of new ideas, to have the tough conversations. For instance, how much can Guyana absorb in a particular year of oil revenues? How much can you actually say, okay, the oil revenue is coming in, how much can we use? How many roads can we build that quickly? How many schools can we upgrade that quickly? There's an actual number that can be attached to that. So the willingness to have those conversations and the openness of that new government to do so, I think is a lesson that South Africa should absolutely be having. Is let's disrupt this and think about new ideas, because what's working, what's happened in the past, worked now.
Maybe you should have a conversation like that on one of my Sunday afternoon programs, and invite you to be part of a panel, Sandile.
Oh, sure. Yes, I'd absolutely love to. Yeah.
The next question, Michelle Mickle-Foster. Hi, Sandile. I am enjoying your interview. Do you ever have the opportunity to reach back and inspire young ladies needing an example of who they can become?
I do. So part of my decision to leave academia, the reason that it was so fraught, is because I loved teaching. I loved the interacting with students. I loved mentoring. And so the idea of leaving that behind, actually more than anything, was what really it was difficult. It made leaving academia difficult because I had this direct path back to these young women, especially. At Berkeley, I was part of the leadership of this organization called Women in Economics at Berkeley, and it was meant to bring more women into majoring in economics and then filter them through the pipeline all the way to full professor at the end of the day, but obviously through the PhD process as well. And so as part of that, we formed an undergraduate women in economics group. And so there was a lot of mentoring going on there. In particular, I have 3 or 4 mentors that are still at Berkeley now that are filtering through and coming up through that process. I also have mentees throughout the country that are in various stages. So some are finishing up their sociology PhDs at Harvard. Others are just starting PhD programs at Duke. Some are in undergrad and applying to research summer internships, and so I do as much as I possibly can reach out and pull. Yeah. Very much a part of my narrative and how I got here was people pulling me up. I have several excellent mentors. I'm a big advocate of mentors that pulled me up and into inner circles, and I just want to pay it forward with as many people as I possibly can, especially young women that aren't normally welcomed with open arms into this field, or don't think that they'll be open with open arms into this field. Going forward, now that I'm in this big transition, now that I finished a PhD and I've moved to Washington, D.C., and I'll be in the policy space, I'm working with colleges that are close by. So in particular, University of Maryland, Baltimore County, which is a small honors college led by Freeman Hrabowski, a fabulous college president, one of the best college presidents in the country. And he's fully committed to getting as many Black and brown students into PhDs in the STEM field as possible. Now, they've been very, very successful in traditional STEM, so the traditional pure sciences, if you will, but there's been less attention in the social sciences. And so I've been working with the economics department there to start similar pipeline programs. And as part of that, I've also said, send me any students that have any kind of piqued interest, any curiosity that could deal with like a conversation of someone that's going to be open and encouraging to continue those conversations. And so I have a couple students there that I'm currently menteeing that are still at that school, and we have conversations back and forth. But I'm always looking for new opportunities. So also if anyone does have ideas, I'm in the DC DMV area now of ongoing mentoring programs that I can plug into. I would be thrilled to hear about those programs.
You're about to start work at the IMF, or if you've started it yet?
Yes, exactly. Next week, I'll be starting work.
Are you excited?
I'm so excited. I'm so excited. So I'm going to be joining the Asia Pacific department. And I think that there's just a lot of exciting things happening. I'm also a trade economist. So in particular in the area of trade, a lot of interesting things happening in Asia right now. And so I'm excited to be part of those conversations and whatever movement forward there is with respect to policy there.
Talking about international trade and macroeconomics, why those particular areas? Why did you focus on those particular areas?
They're the most impactful. So kind of going back to what I attach myself to. There's the big different fields, micro and macro. And then within micro, there's a large field of development. So that's what generally people think of, either the macroeconomists, people that deal with interest rates, inflation, growth, and then people that do development. So people that go into small communities and will, for instance, give out cash transfer programs or do microfinancing or give out goats, for instance, and see how that impacts the community. So those are like really the two economists that people tend to think of when they think of economists. And so that was really, for me, it was like, I knew I wanted to get out there and work in the emerging world. Which path should I take? This very macro, high level approach, or the kind of nitty gritty, going village by village and figuring out what doesn't work? How do you power a village from nothing, for instance? And I decided to take the macro approach just because I think that it's going to impact the most people in the long run. I go back to what I said before, is that what I've seen from the data, and even just from country narratives, qualitative experience, if you will, anecdote, is that the single most sustainable way that we've brought people out of poverty as a human race has been through economic growth. And it's not always equal or equalizing, right? So we've seen economic growth more recently with unequal outcomes and increasing unequal outcomes. But the way that I view it, the bargain that I'm willing to strike is that I'm okay with there being unequal outcomes as long as all boats are rising.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so so that's generally my approach. I think that it's increasingly hard to have equalizing growth, even though I think it's a goal that's worthy. Um, but as a macroeconomist, I'm absolutely in support of kind of big picture GDP growth year on year, even if it's unequal in the short term. I think that, again, all boats rising. And when I'm saying all boats rising, I'm saying millions and millions and millions of boats rising. The example I'll give you, which people often point to, is China, right? When it went through its market reforms. And so suddenly you had this exploding middle class where people, in terms of the day to day of what that looks like in economic growth on the ground, is people being able to suddenly afford refrigerators. So, what does that mean? Now they're able to buy meat, they're able to buy produce and keep it for longer periods. So, they're able to provide better meals for their families. There's less health issues. So, again, I talk a lot about growth. I focus on these very top line numbers, inflation, as well as GDP growth. But the way that it actually happens on an individual family level, I know filters through in really meaningful ways.
Mm. The Caribbean. You
Mm-hmm.
visited the Caribbean recently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, several countries, Trinidad, Guyana, Barbados, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about, and this might be unfair, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Tell us about your observations, first as a woman, and then as an
As a woman, I know it's very uh, so I was largely traveling on my own,
uh-huh.
and I did Belize, Trinidad, Guyana with mommy and the rest of the family, and then St. Lucia at the very end. And the reason that I chose the solo countries were Belize and Trinidad, and then St. Lucia at the end. Part of the reason was I knew that I could travel there alone as a woman,
Uh-huh.
without much trouble. And that was very much the case. So people were hospitable and lovely and invited me out to, have dinner with them. After I'd met them at a coffee shop, for instance, they would invite me out with their friends to have dinner. Uh, they made sure I was making it home okay, all of that, which was unnecessary, but it was lovely. Yeah, no particular observations individually for me as a woman. Women in all these countries seemed very empowered.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, it was women actually that were inviting me out for these dinner parties with their friends and everything. So it was and they were owners of restaurants or they were creatives, owned galleries. Um, yeah, women seemed very, very empowered and largely comfortable. And I know some of the places, so for Trinidad, for instance, has this like very bad reputation from the outside, at least from other Caribbean
Right,
people.
right.
Especially, everybody likes to shade at Trinidad. But for me, on the ground, it was completely lovely, and I felt completely safe there the entire time. So I felt no weird gendered discomfort at all. Uh, as an economist,
Mm-hmm.
it's the Caribbean is wildly diverse. So for me now, saying, "Oh, the Caribbean, like, what's your economic take on it?" is as ridiculous as saying, "Oh, Sub-Saharan Africa, what's your take on it?" Like we're talking about a lot of countries and a lot of different situations. So even just comparing, for instance, Belize to Trinidad or Belize to Guyana, it's each one is night and day in terms of the dynamics on the ground. And it would, yeah, I would be like, okay, so I'm going to write 3 papers, right? I can't write a single paper on the Caribbean after being there. Yeah.
Would you take on that challenge? I know you love to do this research and write things and so
I'm
on.
supposed to be starting work on Asia. But no, so I have actually, I've been considering kind of writing down some short vignettes, if you will,
Uh-huh.
from my experience, just kind of takeaways, especially about Guyana. There is this thing of, again, on the ground, it feeling like it's on the cusp of something and the possibility of all the change that could happen. So I may write something in terms of specifically that experience and maybe even add in some of my personal narrative to that, my family's personal narrative in that.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah. Because I'm also, I was visiting there during this time of great transition for myself. I can't do any more school. I'm done with school. There's no more degrees to get, and I'm going into like my full adult life in this way. And so being there at exactly the time that Guyana also is kind of stepping forward. Yeah. There's some ideas there that are cooking.
Dr. Spence, Dr. Michael Spence.
Mm-hmm.
After you graduated from Stanford, you worked with him.
I did, yes.
He's a Nobel Prize economist.
Mm-hmm.
And co-authored papers on economic development.
Yeah, we've written a few papers on economic structure and growth. And
tell us a bit about that experience and how it helped prepare you for your doctoral studies.
So Mike is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. He, from day one, took my ideas seriously, deferred to me as the expert in the area of macro, and brought me in to his inner circle as well, and into his home. So I got to meet his family, his children, and again, there was in our interactions just this accessibility and this willingness to learn. So he's a Nobel Prize winning economist, but and you would think that like after winning the Nobel Prize, you're like, okay, I've got this. Like I'm the best in the discipline. I don't need to do anything else. But he is constantly pushing himself forward, learning more, exploring more, wrestling with new ideas, writing down new models. And so certainly I think in terms of my takeaways from our ongoing engagement with each other, it's just that there's the learning process is never ending, and it's such a delight, right? Like to continue to wrestle with new ideas, to take on a new research question and really play with the data or play with the new model from year to year, and to continue to find such enjoyment in that, even if I think at some point I've reached my professional peak in some way, that I've done everything I want to do. So that's a big lesson. And then the second is remaining. So as I continue to push forward, remaining really accessible for others in the same way that he was accessible for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I consider him a mentor. So again, in terms of paying it forward and the importance of paying it forward, those are other lessons. And then also not to be wildly intimidated by the titles. His CV is as fancy as it could possibly get in the world, not just in our discipline. And being able to kind of sit in a room and be vulnerable in front of him, and have him be vulnerable in front of me with respect to our intellectual ideas, I think that helped me in my PhD process, because I was walking into rooms with people whose textbook I was holding. Wow. And being like, I didn't really get what you said in that lecture. Like, let's go through this again. And so just that willingness to walk into rooms, even when the person's very, very fancy, at least on paper. Really? I got over that with him very quickly. And so it never even came up at Berkeley. I was like, you wrote this textbook. We're going to go through this.
There's a power and strength in vulnerability. And when you mention willingness to be vulnerable, I think of your mom and how strong she is being vulnerable. Who would you say, where did you get that from? Would it be from her?
Where do I get the vulnerability from?
Yes, the
willingness to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
There's actually so mommy can be vulnerable, but I actually think I get this more from my girlfriends, at Spelman in particular. I have a very close knit group of women that I'm still close to. In particular, one of my best friends, Brahani. I remember when we were like in kind of junior year, early senior year, somewhere around then, and we were discussing like what our life plans were, so like 10-year plans, casual Friday night activity. And as she was kind of going through it at the time, she was trying to figure out whether to go to law school. And Brahani's, again, absolutely brilliant. And kind of she could have done anything and been really great at it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, she wasn't really sure of what she wanted to do. And she said, I'm getting more comfortable in saying, I don't know. I'm getting more comfortable in sitting in this unknown period and knowing that I will figure it out, but I do not have it figured out right now. And that like blew my mind. That's like not my personality, not generally how I like approach life. I'm like, there needs to be a plan. There needs to be a 10-step plan. And so I think sitting with her in that moment and seeing also, by the way, how it's all turned out, which is, you know, she's now the social media director for Essence Magazine. Again, she's brilliant. Seeing how it all turned out, like that's over time made me much more comfortable with sitting in uncertainty, sitting in places where I know what my truth is, maybe in a particular moment, but not anywhere beyond that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And still being secure in myself in that space. Yeah. So I'd say, and I can think of actually a few more girlfriends also that have like taught me that lesson. Absolutely.
What are most people surprised to learn about you when they get to know
you? I don't know. I'm pretty generous of spirit in terms of putting myself fully out there.
Uh-huh.
But so I try not to hold back, actually. The most surprising thing. Oh, well, sometimes I am unsure in myself. Yeah. Sometimes I'm faking it till I make it. And I think that surprises a lot of people, because I think my public persona and certainly, you know, when I stand in front of a classroom or I stand in front of a group of people, I come across as rather very confident and very like clear.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, sometimes I'm like in the wind. So I think that would probably be what surprises people most about me. But I'm trying again. I'm to continuously to say that more often, especially with my mentees, because they're like, "Oh my goodness, you're so together. Like you were on this like very clear linear path, and you got everything you wanted." And I'm like, "No, like oh goodness, like I don't want to give off that impression, because then it makes them feel as if they can never ever get to this stage, or they can't get to the next stage." It's been really important for me to increasingly say it can be messy at times. I can be messy at times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any advice
we're human, right? Like
of course.
Yeah.
For young men.
But Black women are not always given the space to be human, by the way. And so I also I again increasingly want to share this narrative of like but especially me as a Black woman that has accomplished a lot on paper. I'm still very, very, very human. Yeah.
If you were to sit down with me for an interview 10 years from now, what will you be telling me about your accomplishments?
About my knowledge?
About your accomplishments.
Oh, about my accomplishments. Hopefully I'll still feel as if I'm just starting out.
I like that.
Every year, you know, I look back, you know, kind of 5 years ago, 2 years ago, and I say, okay, like, where are you relative to then? And it's always like, oh no, I totally didn't know what was going on 2 years ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. And now I kind of have a better, I've righted my path a bit, if you will. And so I hope that continues to happen. I hope that I continue to be a dynamic, learning human being that feels always on the edge of something. If in 10 years I'm saying, oh, I've crushed it, done, dusted, retirement soon, early, like, then things have gone horribly wrong. I hope that I'm as anxious about next steps, as hungry for what comes next, as emboldened to still try and make a larger mark on the world in 10 years. Yeah, I hope I still feel like I'm at the beginning of things.
So looking back on the on your academic path, what have you learned about yourself in the past 10 years? One thing.
So much. Like, where to begin? Yeah, trying to think of like the big highlights. To ask for help is a big one.
Ah,
To ask for help early and often. That people want to help. You just need to ask the question.
okay.
And people will show up for you in incredible ways that are completely unexpected. To take kind of pitfalls, hurdles as learning experiences, and less as personal marks against myself.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the really big ones. To take myself less seriously. Yeah, those are the big ones in terms of the last 10 years of development.
What still surprises you about you?
What still surprises me about me?
Uh-huh. I know, Sandile. It's like I really should have not come on the show this afternoon, but I've waited for so long to get you, and I know you can answer these questions. I'm always curious about your answers.
Yeah, what surprises me most about me? I think so. It's a mixed thing. So it's something that I'm currently struggling with slash
Uh-huh.
happy about, but this is a mixed answer. So I tend to put other people's needs very, very much above my own, despite the fact that I am also very, very like a huge self-advocate. But I can be too giving, too bending, if you will. And I think maybe what surprises me most about me is as I've been struggling with finding better balance and breaking up some bad habits, old habits, adopting new habits, how even with a lot of intentionality behind an effort to change something about me, even if I have the language and the skill set and the 10-step plan, that there are some deep soul things, if you will, that are sticky. That I can't seem to shake. And again, this is not necessarily a horrible thing. Like it's a wonderful thing to be incredibly generous and loving and accessible to people and bending to people. But you have to have balance. And so, yeah, I would say that's the thing that surprised me the most is that there are some sticky, deep characteristics that are very, very hard to shift. Which given how open and academic intellectual I am, I was like, if I want to change something, I'll change something, right? It's been interesting grappling with that.
There's a question in the chat room I forgot to ask you. Miriam asks, what can Africa learn from Silicon Valley?
Oh. Everyone wants to be Silicon Valley. What can Africa learn from Silicon Valley? Certainly the importance of a lot of really, really high-skilled people, creative, high-skilled people, being in a small space. So Silicon Valley is not Silicon Valley just because there's all these smart people in the world in general that work in these tech companies. Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley because of how compact it is, how concentrated this wealth of humans is. And so some of the ways that shows up, of course, is you get all these investors and you get all of these people with ideas matching all the time. And the investors are right there so they can meet in person. So that's just like a simple geography kind of nice thing. Other ways are if I decide to leave Google, I can get 7 other jobs at all these other fancy areas tomorrow, right? So that also encourages people to stay in the area. It also encourages people to continue to tool up, to continue learning, to stay on the edge of whatever is the coolest new thing in Silicon Valley. And so those would be the 2 lessons. Is number one, really make sure that there are strong incentives for people to be their absolute best, and to create an environment, like literally a geographical space, wherein the money can match with the ideas. And so whatever that infrastructure needs to look like to encourage that, throw efforts behind that. Throw efforts behind that.
You have traveled extensively, Sandile.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to go to your favorite place to relax,
Mm-hmm.
with your favorite book or thing to read,
Mm-hmm.
your favorite drink and your favorite music,
Okay.
where would this place be? What would you be reading? What would you be drinking? And what would you be listening to?
All of it. No. So it would be, so all the things would be, I would be in the Seychelles,
Uh-huh.
on an island called Ladigue. And you could basically only get there via ferry from Praslin or Mahe, the main island. And there's no cars on the island. There's only bicycles and really large tortoises. Other modes of transportation for babies. And there's these guys that sell fruit like on these beaches, which are effectively private beaches because it's just such a low population island. And so you like kind of meander through the forest and you end up in these little cove beaches, and there's a fruit man that happens to kind of be nearby, and he's cutting up all these wildly exotic fruits, and it's just the perfect moment. What I would be drinking is probably something really refreshing. So something, yeah, so water, of course, on the side, stay hydrated, always. But maybe like a gin and tonic, something light, or a mojito, something very refreshing. And then I'd be reading everything. So Chimamanda Adichie is one of my favorites. I love Octavia Butler. I've been just recently getting into her this past summer. Yeah, so that would be my happy place. Music would be some like folksy, fun, like Tracy Chapman or something. Yeah. That sounds like a relaxing day.
That sounds good. If you were to eavesdrop your parents telling a stranger about you, what would your mom say? And if your dad were alive, of course, what would he say? How would he describe you?
Mommy would be saying she's very proud of me. I think that she would describe us similarly, actually. I very, very much do take after her, and am hopefully continuing to grow into her. Like I always joke that she's more beautiful, smarter version of me with way better hair.
With what?
For those of you that know my mother. Yeah, so I think that she'd be saying, Sandile takes after me a lot, and I'm very, very proud of her. Yeah. My dad, so I think his politics actually were probably a little bit left of mine, and therefore his economics were a little bit left of mine. So I think that he would probably be saying, I'm very proud of her, but, she's been ruined by like the neoliberals. Something to that effect. We would have really, really amazing debates about the future of the world economy, and in particular what to do in emerging markets and developing countries, and how to inclusively make sure that people are moving forward. Yeah.
What do you miss most about him?
The gut response is his laughter and how I felt around him, which was just wholly loved. And like a mini superhero. He used to take me to his classes. Again, he was a professor of education, and so he's teaching pedagogy, and I think he used to use me as an example of like, if you have high expectations and your child can read at an early age, and I'd be like sitting there reading in front of them like a whole classroom, a whole lecture hall. So I always felt very centered, like I was incredibly special.
When are you most happy?
Sorry?
When are you most happy?
When am I most happy?
Mm-hmm.
Right after a really great conversation with another human, where I feel like we've like really connected. Yeah.
What are you most proud of?
I think my little brother.
Oh.
He is a wonderful human being, and I felt like a mini mommy to him because I'm 10 years older than him.
Mm-hmm.
When we were growing up, and when he was born, our family was going through a really hard time because my father had been in a horrible accident and was in recovery. And so a lot of the rest of the family's resources were on my father, and I kind of was like, again, mini mommy to this little human. And I got to kind of see him go through all of his stages over time. And then I left for college, of course, because I'm 10 years older. And we've gotten closer as he went through the late high school phase and into college. And now we're able to connect again on this kind of adult level. And I adore him. He's such a great human. And I like to think that I had some small part of who he is. Mm-hmm. He's so loving and so thoughtful. He's good people.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell your 15-year-old self?
The classic question.
Yes.
The biggest one is stay focused on your dreams. Uh-huh. But that's the easy one. I think I don't know if this is like, if our advice is useful on an ongoing basis, like my generation's advice for the next generation. Things have changed so much for them. Mm-hmm. So for example, I don't know what it's like to go through high school and college and have all of my both successes and failures forever on the internet, especially the failures. And so even where I'm like, take risks, go wild, you're young, go have fun, throw caution to the wind, I'm like, that's actually not perfect advice for this generation of 15-year-olds. Mm-hmm. They do have to be more careful than we ever had to be. But with that said, I guess my defunct, possibly old, outdated advice is to stay singularly focused on their dreams, on their goals, to absolutely trust that the universe will be there to catch them if they're doing their part of it. Become the experts in something, and have that something be something you're actually passionate about. There's nothing more tragic than to see somebody that's become an expert in something that they don't care anything about.
Wow. Last question. Yeah. What makes you laugh out loud?
What makes me think about that?
No, what makes you laugh out loud?
Lots of things. But my friends make me laugh all the time. The hilariousness of us trying to adult as adults.
Oh.
It's like,
Sandile is always so easy talking to you, and I didn't realize we went past the time. So thank you very much for spending this time with us. And
thank you so much for having me back again. I don't know if I've added anything new to this.
You definitely have. It
was such a delight. I really appreciate all the questions. Now I have all these paper ideas brewing in my head about these cross-cultural lessons in economics that I should be writing down. So I really appreciate it. It was wonderful.
Good. Thank you, Sandile.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good evening.